Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavati Paschatyadeshadarine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyabhadi Paschatyadeshadarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Jaya Shri
Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita
Gadadhar
Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda.
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama,
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare. Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Jaya Radha Gokulananda, Radha Gokulananda, Shri Radhe. Jaya Radha Gokulananda, Radha Gokulananda, Shri Radhe. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. Shri Harinam Sankirtan Yajna ki, Hare Krishna Mahamantra ki, Srila Prabhupada ki. Sorry. Hare Krishna, Shiva Prabhu, and Radha Koli Mataji, and Shashi Mataji, and all others who are watching. Today we will be continuing with our Bhagavad Gita overview series with the 8th chapter summary entitled Attaining the Supreme. Before we start, we will do the Mangalacharan and then we'll proceed. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Narayanam Namaskritya
Narayanam Namaskritya
Naram Chaiva Narottamam
Naram Chaiva Narottamam
Devim Saraswatim Vyasam
Devim Saraswatim Vyasam
Tato Jayamudhirayet.
Tato Jayamudhirayet.
Hare Krishna. So, Today we'll be discussing the 8th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which is entitled the Attaining the Supreme. So as a brief summary of where we're up to so far, in the 7th chapter, we focused mainly on the importance and emphasis of hearing about Lord Krishna, to learn about him, hearing about Lord Krishna, to see him as the essence, as the key ingredient in the world around us, whether that be the Vedic mantras or whether that be the taste of water, the ability in man. We also saw him, how through hearing we can see him as the source of everything and everyone, the source and the controller of the 3 modes of material nature, the source of material and spiritual energies. And then after that, we discussed how there are 4 kinds of people who do and do not surrender unto the Lord. It's simply put, the pious surrender, the impious do not. And even then, of those who surrender, there are 2 types of people who surrender in an improper way. So, do you remember who the 2 types of people are? Do you remember? Those 2 types of people are the impersonalists, who surrender into the impersonal aspect of the Lord, and also those who worship the demigods, because they forget and to recognize that the Lord is also the source of the demigods as well. So those are the 2 types of surrender which are done in an improper manner. And then finally we talked about verses 26 to 30-ish, what we perceive as desirable and undesirable, ichcha and dvesha, and this duality which arises from that. And we focus on material objects as being desirable or undesirable, when actually everything in the material world is undesirable. And so because of that duality, which the bewilderment arises because of that duality of desire and hate, ichcha and dvesha samuttena. So that is where we're up to in chapter 7. Now finally, at the end of chapter 7, Alma, can I have the Bhagavad Gita? I forgot to bring one, sorry. At the end of chapter 7, Lord Krishna introduces some new terms, new terminology, new Sanskrit words. And so this actually, the link to chapter 7 and 8 is from these last 2 verses of chapter 7. And in these 2 verses, he gives 8 new terms, 8 new Sanskrit words, which Arjun then goes on to question him about. You can go and look into the intricacies of the Sanskrit, but for the purpose of the summary, these 8 terms are given, and the first thing this chapter opens up with, chapter 8, is Arjuna asking a question. Kim tad brahma kim madhyatma kim karma purushottama adibhutam cha kim proktam adidaivam kim uchyate. He's inquiring, what does adibhuta mean? What is Brahman? What is the self? What is the meaning of adidevata? Like that, he's going through the various terms and he's asking. And so it begins with the question that Arjuna asks in verses 1 and 2. And he asks these questions, and it tells us what the first lesson we learn immediately as soon as the chapter starts is the importance of the asking of these questions. Now, doubting is a function of intelligence. Anyone who has intelligence can doubt and question. And so it's important, especially in the spiritual life, that we use that and we clarify these doubts, because whenever we have doubts, these cause impediments on the path of devotional service. And so Arjuna immediately asks the questions. Actually, we notice in the Bhagavad Gita that Krishna never reprimands Arjuna for butting in and asking questions. Instead, he encourages it because it's so important. It's the sign of a good student to ask the teacher when they don't know questions in class. Yeah, so they'll ask. And so in that way, Krishna is encouraging Arjuna to ask the questions, because it's only through asking the questions that we develop the knowledge. Whether that be any knowledge, even material knowledge. If you want to understand, I don't know, a concept in chemistry, then you can do acid plus alkali is water. Is salt plus water. And so like that, we can understand that, okay, that's the concept. But then we need to go and realize that and then understand how to apply that concept in other aspects. And so that the way we gain that knowledge is through questioning, understanding, and furthering our knowledge. And so in that same way, Arjuna now, he's got a doubt, and immediately the first thing he does is he asks the question. And that's what takes us into this the 8th chapter of the Gita. And actually, there's certain types of questions. So the question that Arjuna asks is often, it's what we can describe as a perfect question, because the question is relating to the aspects of the Supreme. How can we develop ourselves? How can we improve ourselves? And it's a question which helps us in the spiritual understanding. So I'm just trying to get the verse up here. Similarly, when the Srimad Bhagavatam is spoken, the sages in Naimisharanya, they're headed by Shonaka, and they ask questions. They ask 6 main questions in the first chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And what does Sutta Goswami say? Sutta Goswami is the person they are questioning. And when they ask these questions, what does Sutta Goswami say? He does not say, oh, what sort of question is that? Instead, he says, no. In first canto, second chapter, verse number 5, Munaya sadhu prushtoham bhavadbhir loka mangalam yat kritaha Krishna samprashno yenatma suprasedati. That, oh sages, your questions are worthy. They're so relevant because they relate to Lord Krishna. And only these types of questions are capable of completely satisfying the self. Yenatma suprasedati, completely pleased. The self becomes completely pleased. Why? Yat kritaha Krishna samprashno. The question is related to Lord Krishna. And so in that way, it's relevant, and therefore it's a perfect question. And to a perfect question, you can also give a perfect answer. If the question is not perfect, then the answer also is not perfect. So these types of questions are rewarded, or encouraged is the right word, encouraged in Krishna consciousness. And so actually in the 2nd verse of the 8th chapter, Arjuna describes the Lord as Madhusudana. Adhyagnyam katam kotra dehesmin Madhusudana. Madhusudana means the killer of the demon Madhu. So the description by the Acharyas is given in the same way that Krishna annihilated the demon Madhu. In the same way, Arjuna is asking, now my desires are like these demons. They are impeding me. They're stopping me from completely understanding. So in the same way, please, can you destroy my desires? That's just a little interesting thing that we can learn from the purport. And so immediately, Krishna goes on in verses 3 and 4 to answer 7 of these questions in depth. He describes, this is the meaning of this is the meaning of that. Adidevatam means the demigods, etc., etc. And then there's the 8th question which Arjuna asks. And that is actually what is described in this whole chapter. Krishna takes the rest of the chapter just to explain the one shloka. Prayana kale chakatam nayosi niyatatma bihi. That at the end of life, at the time of death, how can those people, or how can we think or engage our mind in the devotional service? So how do we, what should we do at the time of death? And this is why this chapter becomes relevant. And so this chapter is called Attaining the Supreme for that reason. The other reason it's important to focus on this chapter from a logical point of view is Arjuna's in a war. He's going to battle, and so there is a high chance of death. So if death comes about, Arjuna needs to be prepared as to what to do for death. And so this first section from verses 1 to 4, it deals with Krishna answering Arjuna's questions. It's the first thing we take away is the importance of clarifying the doubts in Krishna consciousness. And then also now those questions about Lord Krishna, they are the truly relevant questions, because through them we can achieve complete happiness and we can become completely satisfied. And so this is the first section, verses 1 to 4. Now the second section deals with the time of death. Now often in Western cultures, not so much in Eastern cultures, in Western cultures generally, death is seen as a morbid topic, should not be discussed. You know, it's sort of a thing that we should not talk about. You know, don't talk about death. Oh no, it's so sad and morbid and gloomy. Why are you talking about it? I was so pessimistic of you. And it's not actually talked about much. It's sort of a taboo around it. Whereas in the Eastern cultures, it's not so much, because the people, especially the devotees, they have no worry talking about death at all, because death is seen as simply a transmigration of the body. And so, especially for the devotees of the Lord, no matter who the devotee is again, the devotee of the Lord is not affected. I said Eastern cultures, it's not so much there, but even if you go to an Eastern, country and you start talking about death, people will think you're some sort of pessimistic individual. That is still there. There's no doubt about that. And so it's like if you're going to a film, you want to watch a film, you have become so hyped about this film, you're so excited to watch the film, and then someone comes up to you and says, and the words they say are, "Oh, you know what? I'm going to find the exact words that they'll say. What do they say? You'll never guess what happens." I can remember the phrase. "You'll never guess what happens," they say. And after that, before you can interject and stop them from speaking, they go on to reveal the whole plot of the film, how the film ends, and you're just there like, oh, why did he ruin the film for me? Why did you ruin the film for me? And then this is a sort of similar idea we see here as well, that people want to enjoy their lives. People want to live, do the things they want to do, but they don't want to think about how this is going to come to an end. You're spoiling the film for them. And in the same way, it's often not talked about, but it's actually a very important part of the Gita that we talk about this death, because the death is only the disappearance of the body. As established in the second chapter of the Gita, that our identity is established as the soul, the spirit soul, which is the driving force of life, which provides the consciousness to the matter. In fact, although it might be, again, a morbid thought, this body is simply a dead body, but it's being animated by the soul, because without the soul, this body has no life to it. It's simply matter. It's just a bunch of atoms. It has no actual life to it. And so me moving my hand is not because of my body, actually. It's because there's a driving force of life, which is the soul. And so that's very important to understand. From verses 5 to 8, we deal with understanding what happens at the time of death. And the most important concept that comes from there is in verse number 6. What you think of at the time of death, that state you will attain. And this is one of the biggest things that's emphasized there. That at the time of death, what the state of our consciousness determines what happens in our next body. Because, of course, death is only the cessation of the body. The soul is immortal, as the whole of the second chapter deals with that section. And so I'll read out the verse. Yam yam va bismaram bhavam tyajantante kalevaram tam tamevaiti kaunteya sada tad bhava bhavita. Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, O son of Kunti, that state he will attain without fail. And so the idea that the critical moment of death, the thing that we are thinking on at the time of death, that stays there in our consciousness, and along with it comes along with us, transmigrates from one body to the next, and that body is the body that we attain. There are other factors, of course, in what body we attain and the life that we get based on the actions we have carried out. But the idea is this is the most fundamental, the critical point at the time of death. And whatever we think about is what we get. And so there's actually a story given in the Srimad Bhagavatam in the 5th canto, chapters 7, 8, 9. It deals with the story of Bharat Maharaj, or Jada Bharat later. Bharat Maharaj is a king. He's a king of the globe at the time. And he does all his kingly affairs. He does it so nicely. And at some point he decides, okay, I'm now too old to keep on doing my kingly duties. I will now retire, and I will go to the forest and retire so I can carry out my spiritual activity and focus on improving my life. So to get ready for death, of course. And so he goes to the forest. Now, no fault of his own. This event happens. And so he goes to the forest, and as he's there, sitting down, meditating, doing whatever he needs to do, his spiritual activities, he's there. And so he sees a pregnant doe or a female deer. And he sees this doe come along to the bank of a river and drink water. So she starts to drink water. And he sees that. And then, I don't know, is it a lion or a tiger? A tiger. A tiger comes along, and the doe, of course, being very scared, jumps across the river and tries to escape from the tiger. And in the process of doing so, has a miscarriage. And the baby deer falls into the water of the river and is carried along the stream of the river. and he sees this incident, and later on, and so the doe who was jumped across the river ends up passing away, and then this Bharat Maharaj, being very compassionate and merciful, he goes and retrieves the deer from the water, the baby deer from the water, and he starts taking care of it, nurturing it, nourishing it, and fully making sure it's looked after. And in the process of doing so, slowly, little by little, he becomes very, he's always thinking of the deer at the time. There's no one else in the forest to talk to or anything like that. And there's only this deer and baby deer and him and the baby deer that he's, raised. And so throughout whatever activity he's doing, he's actually becoming more and more distracted. He's just, he's meditating and then having a little look. Where's, okay, the deer's over there, it's fine. Or maybe if he's doing arati, he's just having a quick look. Oh, okay, the deer's fine. So instead, his consciousness and his thought process is completely oriented towards that deer, that baby deer, which is completely natural. And so then somehow or other, the deer leaves him. The deer leaves him and he cannot find the deer. He goes wandering throughout the forests, looking over and over, calling for the deer, and he can't find anywhere. And so he thinks, oh no, maybe she's died, or maybe the deer's been killed by a tiger or lion in the forest, or maybe she's just wandered and left me away. And so he thinks like this, and he becomes so miserable and dejected. And then, of course, as time goes on, at some point in time, his body also has to deteriorate. And so the time of death arrives. And at the time of death, all his consciousness is thinking about is that baby deer. What happened to that baby deer? He's always just thinking about that deer in the back of his mind. And so the time of death comes, he passes away from this body. And because his consciousness was completely oriented and focused on that deer, by the time when he leaves his body and when he gets his next body, he attains the body of the deer in his next life. And so this reveals an important thing to us, which is it's a blueprint or the idea that whatever we think about at the end of this life, it's that state which we attain in our next life. So the phrase is often used that life is like a preparation and death is like the examination. So whatever we think about, because logically, whatever we do during our life is what we're going to think about at the time of death. And so if we prepare our life and our consciousness, as seen in the verses 5 to 8, it's all about remembering Lord Krishna at the time of death as well. So if we prepare our consciousness in such a way that we can think about the Lord at the time of death, then in our next birth, we not only do we not come back to the material world, but we also go past the material world into the spiritual world, which is permanent, which is not temporary. So in verse number 5, which is, if anyone is memorizing the verses, this one is a really, really, really nice verse, a really important verse to learn. Antakale chamameva smaran muktva kalevaram yaprayati samadbhavam yati nastyatra samshaya. And whoever at the end of his life quits his body, remembering me alone, at once attains my nature. Of this there is no doubt. The Lord is emphasizing that whoever thinks of the Lord at the time of death attains the Lord. Now, this is the most important thing to understand. Now, what's so good about attaining the Lord, we'll see in the next section. But what Arjun then Krishna points out an interesting point. Now, in verse number 7, he says that actually when you carry out your duty, you should think of me. And this is where it clarifies a little doubt. Sometimes people have this doubt after reading the Gita, chapter 3, 5, the whole of the first 6 chapters. The only one point we've been saying is do your duty, but do it for the Lord. It goes above and beyond that. It's not just do your duty and offer the results to the Lord, but 2 things are emphasized in that verse. I'll read the translation. Therefore, Arjun, you should think of me in the form of Krishna. At the same time, carry out your prescribed duty of fighting. With your activities dedicated to me, your mind and intelligence fixed on me, you will attain me without doubt. So 2 things are, first thing, it's not just doing the duty and offering the results to the Lord, but it's doing the duty and constantly remembering the Lord, keeping the Lord in the back of the mind, always remembering the Lord, whatever duty one's carrying out. So while doing the prescribed duty, one should remember the Lord. The second thing is dedicated to me, with your activities dedicated to me. So the activity that the prescribed duty one can carry out, one will, because we have to work, the nature of this material world, as we've described, in so much detail in the first 6 chapters, is that we have to work. And so if we dedicate the activity that we do for the Lord, as well as always thinking about the Lord while carrying out that activity, as well as offering the fruits unto the Lord, that is the correct way. Material world will throw so many problems at us, so many difficulties, full of dualities, ups and downs, happiness and distress. And there's the modes of nature. There's all these people where the idea is that rampant materialism and capitalism and economic growth and being wealthy and looking so looking so cool, if you like, just for the people around us, trying to conform with society. That idea often goes on right now in people's minds. And so actually, the way you can survive all the miseries and the difficulties that the material world throws at us is by carrying out that process. Working for the Lord, giving the results of the activity to the Lord. But more importantly, in this chapter, it's about remembering the Lord. Because, of course, if we remember the Lord throughout the life, and if we're remembering and that becomes natural for us, then at the time of death as well, we'll also think of the Lord. And that way, we can go to the Lord. So although these 2 sections only take up 8 verses, really it's the most important point for this chapter, which has to be hammered in at this point, that at the time of death, whatever state we think of, we attain that state, whatever our consciousness is focused on. And so that for that reason, we should focus on the Lord. That's that's the gist of those few verses. And then, so this is verses 5 to 8. Okay, so I've just read that. From verses 9 to 16 is the next section, which is about, now we discussed the time of death, but in particular, we just discussed the importance of remembering Krishna. Now, how can we remember Krishna at the time of death? So in verses 9 to 13, there are different ways given how we can remember the Lord, remembering Lord Krishna while you're chanting the syllable Om of Vedic mantras, remembering Lord Krishna while doing our various activities. And the one who's, carrying out some sort of yogic process, you can still think of the Lord in that way. And you can think about when the time of the body is ended, you can undeviatedly focus on the Lord and carry out our yogic process or whatever with that bhakti. And we can in this way we can attain the Lord. So it's all about remembering the Lord in that sense, from verses 9 to 13. And but the crux of it actually comes into verse number 14, which is verses 9 to 13. They deal with doing it while doing the other activity. But verse number 14, 15, and 16 deal with, now that's done along with that activity. But as Lord Krishna mentioned, what we want to do is we want to do our activities while thinking of the Lord and dedicated to the Lord. And so that activity is not just devotional service, but it's unalloyed devotional service. Whereas these other activities, although they are bhakti, they are devotional service, they are mixed with other aspects, other enjoyments. Oh, I am doing devotional service so I can become liberated from the cycle and birth and death. Or I'm doing devotional service so I can gain this, or I can gain that. Whereas actually devotional service should be performed in verse number 14. It's given wonderfully. I'll simply read the verse actually first before we go on. Verse number 14, wonderful verse. Ananyacheta satatam yomam smarati nityasaha tasyaham sulabha partha nityayuktasya yogina. For one who always remembers me without deviation, I am easy to obtain, O son of Pritha, because of his constant engagement in devotional service. So rather than doing half-heartedly carrying out devotional service, this verse talks about ananya cheta, without the deviation of the mind, undeviated, one-pointed devotional service. Rather than carrying out devotional service with other ideas in mind, when one carries out his activities for the pleasure of the Lord, then this is real devotional service. And what does he say? For him, it's very easy to attain. For that person who carries out with undeviated attention, then it's very easy. Sulabha, very easy to achieve that going to the Lord. So this pure devotion cannot be simply done alongside other desires, although it can happen. The real devotion, because if one's consciousness is always focused on the Lord, then at the time of death, logically, they will then think about the Lord. And so therefore, they'll be able to And so therefore they will be able to think about the Lord at the time of death and therefore go to the Lord. And so we understand then that our focus must be to please the Lord, no matter what we do, undeviated in our consciousness. And a good example of this is a story from the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu he goes to the toilet. Is that a good way to put it? He goes to evacuate, attend nature's call. And so he goes to the toilet to attend nature's call, and he comes out and he's holding his tongue. And everyone else is, well, why are you holding your tongue? What's the need for that? And then he said, well, this tongue is so naughty. And I'm so conditioned to chanting the holy name of the Lord that even while I was doing that dirty business in the toilet, I wanted to chant. Right? And so that's why I'm holding my tongue, because I can't chant in such an inauspicious and dirty place. And then, of course, there is a little boy who is called Gopal, a very young boy. And he actually said, but this is the wrong philosophy that you're practicing. What if you died? What if you passed away while you were in the toilet? What if, for some reason or another, there was an accident in the toilet? Would you then say it's inauspicious to carry out chanting at that time? Is it inauspicious then? And so then he says, no, that you're right. This is why you're actually my guru. You are my Gopala guru. And so this little boy actually, he emphasizes that this is the point. No matter what activity we do, we should think of the Lord, and this will then become pure devotional service. And so then we talk about, so I just mentioned that, it's undeviating. Yeah, Ananya Cheta. This is the whole point of that verse. Ananya Cheta Satatam. It's undeviated attention. So because if we are undeviatedly focused on the Lord, then it'll become so much easier to then think about the Lord at the time of death. Now, what is one of the easiest ways of focusing the mind on the Lord? Is through chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And so in that way, we can focus on the Lord. Then in verse number 15 and 16, we go on to talk about how then, what is the reason then? We can go to the Lord, but what's actually any difference from thinking about something else at the time of death? And so in verse number 15, we get this iconic phrase. Firstly, translation, after attaining me, the great souls who are yogis in devotion never return to the temporary world, which is full of miseries, because they have attained the highest perfection. This is one of like the textbook, class poster phrases of Krishna consciousness, that the material world is a place full of miseries. Dukkhalayam ashashvatam, dukkhalayam, a place full of miseries, and ashashvatam, it's temporary. And as we mentioned way back in the Road to Bhakti lecture, that if one is looking for true happiness and one is looking for that happiness, if one is looking for gold but goes to a coal mine, one is not going to be able to find the gold there. There is a very little chance of finding gold. And if one is looking for happiness then in a place which is full of unhappiness and temporary things, so whatever happiness is it's only flickering. If one goes to that sort of place to look for happiness, then it also won't be fruitful. And so that's why the Lord says that Lord's abode, which is beyond this material universe, which is beyond the realms of this world, that planet, that abode is perfect. It's not affected by it's not temporary, and it's not affected by the miseries of the material world. And then again in verse number 16, this point is emphasized that even from the highest planet in the material world all the way down to the lowest planet, everywhere is a place of misery. People might think the demigods, Svargaloka, Indra, Vayu, Chandra, Varuna, all these demigods, they must have such a nice time there. But no, because they are in the material world, they are also subject to misery. So forget even Indra, right at the top of the material universe is Lord Brahma, and even he is subject to these miseries. And so this material universe, it doesn't spare anyone. The material world is always full of miseries. But one who attains, Lord Krishna says, one who attains my abode, they never take birth again. One who comes to my place will never leave. And so we recognize how important it is there then to, as well as always thinking about the Lord, why is it important to even leave this material universe? because the true happiness cannot be found here. Instead of here, we are stuck in a repeating cycle of birth and death and birth and death and continuing this on and on. Whereas there, we can cut that cycle. And then in verses 17 to 22, we compare these material and spiritual worlds. That actually, in verse number 17, we talk about Brahma. Brahma's lifespan is 311 trillion, 40 billion years. The maths of it is given very nicely in that purport. Please do have a look if you're interested. That Kali Yuga is 432,000 years, etc., etc. But Brahma has a fixed lifespan. And so even Lord Brahma, after his quota, even he will pass away. Even he will have to depart. And so that this idea is that every single individual who is in this material world, whether it be me, my sister, my parents, anyone, because we are here, we naturally know that we are going to die. And this, although it might be the harshest of truths, is nevertheless a truth. And when we fully get that into our understanding, that, okay, this material body is temporary, I am also temporary, so whatever time I have here is very useful. There is a verse that Chanakya Pandit uses time and time and time again, which is that even for one moment, one cannot pay millions and billions of gold coins just to retrieve one moment. So a person who's wise knowing this will utilize that time effectively. And so similarly, if we recognize, as soon as we realize, my God, I'm also temporary, this body is temporary, because as majority of people, we think that, oh, we're gonna live forever. Instead, Yudhishthira Maharaj gives this verse in Mahabharata, Ahanyahani bhutani gachanti hayamalayam sheshastavara michanti kimascharyamataparam. What is more amazing than this? That we all see so many people dying and passing away on a regular basis, and yet for some reason we don't recognize that this is going to happen to us one day. This is going to happen to us one day, so we need to prepare for it. So this is that sort of idea that, so even in the material world, Lord Brahma has to pass away. At some point, even Lord Brahma has to come to an end. And so what to speak of us? All the demigods will have to change. The Manus will change. All of these higher powers in the material world, they also go. And so, although Brahma lives so long, he's also affected by this old age. He's also affected by the material things. He's affected by time. And so all the things that are in the material world are temporary. Everything we gain from the material world is temporary. Sometimes we hear this, but we don't actually fully understand it. And so we don't truly pay attention to it. We don't heed it. That at the end, whatever we get, we're living in some sort of foamy material world where these bubbles are there and we get something from them, but at some point those bubbles are going to pop. And so Lord Krishna says that we should therefore strive to attain the next part, something which goes further and beyond, which is of course the supreme realm. He describes in verse number 20 that there is another unmanifest nature which is eternal, transcendental to this manifested and unmanifested matter. It is supreme and never annihilated, and when all the world is annihilated, that part remains as it is. So it's the beauty of the spiritual world which is spoken about there. And when we truly understand that it is the abode that we need to get to, that in this world we cannot satisfy our desires. It's very funny if you think about it. It's what Yudhishthira Maharaj says, that we all look and we think that, I don't know, by getting the next phone, I'll be happy. Or by getting the newest car, I'll be happy. Or by having this change to my body, I'll be happy. Or by anything. When what happens, everyone can tell from their own personal experience that at some point we have all thought, if I get that, I will be very, very happy. That's it. And then that has been gotten. And instead what has happened? I want to get this now. I want to get that. That if factor we've talked about before, that if I have this, if I have that, I will be happy. But actually that is not going to satisfy the true happiness. The true happiness can only come when we are outside of this material world or engaged in an activity which is transcendental to the material nature. And so then Lord Krishna then talks about, now we've spoken, right? Very logical train of thought. Krishna has answered whatever questions Arjuna has asked. Then the main question that Arjuna asked, that Krishna focuses on, is that what happens at the time of death. He deals with that first section with what to do at the time of death, sorry, not to what to do, the concept of the time of death, that whatever we think of, we will attain. Then he emphasizes that we need to remember the Lord at the time of death, because of course, by remembering the Lord, and as we come to now, we'll be able to transcend the material nature and transcend the material world. And so logically, as we're progressing, we now come to this end bit, which establishes, is a summary of the chapter, and establishes the supremacy of pure devotional service. Now, in verses 23 to 28, these are the concluding verses of the chapter. In verse number 23 and 24, Krishna talks about what happens to the Jnana Yogi. So the Jnana Yogi is one who tries to understand the Lord by empirical knowledge. And so when he leaves, it's given the technical description, the fiery god in the light, auspicious day, fortnight of the waxing moon, or the 6 months when the sun travels north. The Jnani leaves at that point.
Fixed time.
At that point. And so when he leaves, he passes through the various segments of the universe, elaborately described how he can pass through those segments, and then finally achieve liberation. After going through all of this, it has to be at that fixed time where the Jnani leaves. And then these are described, No, there's not much necessity. We can go into the technical details of it, but it's very simply put. That is just that fixed time that when the Jnani leaves, he will be able to transcend the material nature and become liberated. Now, in verses 25 and 26, we also learn about what happens to the Karma Kandi. Now, the Jnani is someone who's interested in learning the knowledge of the Lord through empirical understanding. Now, the Karma Kandi is someone or the Karma Yogi is someone who wants to either do work and enjoy the results of the activity, or do work and they although they might want to go to the Lord, they still enjoy the fruits of their activity themselves. And so when they leave, then it's described at a different time now, opposite of the Jnana Yogi, one who passes away during the smoke, the night, the fortnight of the waning moon, etc. When the sun is going south, and these people, what happens to them? They go up to the heavenly planets to enjoy their whatever pious activities they've done, but afterwards they will come back. And so it's sort of temporary. What actually happens, when they have a certain remainder of karma left, then they can use that to take birth again and carry on their activities. And so there are these two paths given. And there's a path of light and the path of, although it's a path of darkness, it's not like dark. It's all that's happening is that you go up to the heavenly planets and then you come back down, you go up and then etc. It's just in that cycle. And then the other path is where one is able to transcend, but it's very difficult because one has to pass away at the fixed time. So this is, and they can only achieve the Brahmajyoti stage as well. They can't transcend the Brahmajyoti stage. They will transcend material nature at least, but they will not be able to transcend that merging into one with the Brahman. They will only be stuck there. And so then in verses 27 and 28, we establish the conclusion of this chapter. In verse number 27 and 28, so these two are very, very jewel verses in this chapter. I'll just read them out. Naite shriti partha jhanan yogi muhyati kashchana tasmat sarveshu kaleshu yoga yukto bhavarjuna. Although the devotees, they know there's two paths, Arjuna, they are never bewildered therefore be always fixed in my devotion. So the devotees, they know there is this path which goes this way, there is another path which goes another way, but they are unaffected. They are unaffected, and we'll come again in the next verse, which emphasizes this even more, because they know that by engaging in Krishna consciousness, by always thinking of Lord Krishna in the mind, by always focusing on the Lord, by always being conscious of the Lord, then they will that itself guarantees them the supreme destination. It doesn't matter what time they leave. They can leave at any time because they are devotees. And so that establishes then the supremacy of the bhakti in attaining the supreme. And so they are not affected. They don't become bewildered. They don't think, oh no, if I leave in this time, then this will happen. Or if I leave in this time, that will happen. Instead, they simply carry out their devotional activities. All they want to do is please the Lord. And so in that mood, they carry out their activities. And then this is the gist of it all. This verse number 28, I cannot emphasize enough. I'm trying my best, but I cannot emphasize enough how important this verse is. Vedeshu yajneshu tapassu chaiva dhaneshu yat punya phalam pratishtam atyeti tat sarvamidam viditva yogi param stanamupaiti chadyam. A person who accepts the path of devotional service, please listen carefully. A person who accepts the path of devotional service is not bereft of the results derived from studying the Vedas, from performing sacrifices, from undergoing austerities, from giving charity, or from pursuing philosophical and fruitive activities. Simply by performing devotional service, he attains all these, and at the end, he reaches the supreme eternal abode. Now, Vedeshu, Yajneshu, Tapassu Chaiva, Vedeshu. By studying the Vedas, we can study the Vedas all we want. Yajneshu, we can gain the knowledge. Yajneshu, we can perform all the sacrifices and yajnas that we want to. Tapassu, tapa means austerity, by doing all these austerities. Not just that, Daneshu, by giving all the charity we give. Punyaphalam, doing all the activities with philosophical and fruitive activities which will give us some sort of punya and piety. Simply by performing devotional service, we get the result of all of these. Whatever one gets by practicing, this is again a similar idea that has come in the first 6 chapters, that simply by practicing devotional service, one will be able to attain whatever the karma yogi achieves, whatever the jnana yogi achieves, whatever the ashtanga yogi achieves. What all these paths, they end up culminating in devotional service. And there's an extra, there's a bonus though. It's not just that one is able to achieve everything. So the first thing we need to get in, like, wide into us is then, by practicing devotional service, all the good things you can get by practicing all the austerities, all the ritualistic sacrifices, all the studying of the Vedas, they are all obtained, but that's not the thing. The thing is, they are all obtained even if the devotee doesn't want it. If the devotee is not endeavoring or desiring for it, simply as a byproduct of devotional service, one gains all this knowledge. That devotional service or bhakti to the Supreme Lord is the summation of the entirety of all other activities. And there is no loss in carrying out these activities. You will be able to tell from your own personal experience in your own lives, and I can tell from my own life, and others will be able to tell from their own experiences, how actually by coming to Krishna consciousness, we don't lose anything whatsoever. Lord Krishna doesn't say sacrifice your job, sacrifice your duty, or anything like that. Lord Krishna doesn't say that you have to give up anything. There is no giving up. There is only dovetailing. There is only engaging in the spiritual activity. I like to, for example, I like to do business, let's say. Then I can engage in the business that I want to. But simply all I do is I dedicate it for the Lord. And that's it. That is the beauty of devotional service. That in that way, we can constantly engage our thoughts in the devotion of the Lord. And then we will gain everything, right? That's really important. It's achieved automatically. And not only that, you go beyond that, actually. Yogi param stanamupaiti chadyam. There is a verse in the 18th chapter which deals with Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma verse, very famous verse. And in that verse, it says that anyone who achieves that realization, they have no misery, they have no worry, they are only happy, etc., etc. But simply by performing devotion, you can go above and beyond that. Because by performing devotional service to the Lord, then you can engage at the topmost end in the pastimes of the Lord. The yogis, whatever they carry out, although they may go on to a certain end, even those who become liberated, this goes above and beyond that. So you get everything that everyone else gets, but you can go above and beyond that and engage in the pastimes of the Lord in Vrindavan. Just like Mother Yashoda is given the example. Mother Yashoda, she is engaging in one of the topmost devotional service. She's always looking to the Lord as her son. And she's completely engaged in the devotional service to the Lord in that sense. And so that's much, much, much further beyond any kind of liberation. And so by practicing the devotion, right, the summary of chapter 7 and 8, chapter 7, knowledge of the absolute, chapter 8 is attaining the supreme, is that taking this path of bhakti or devotional service to the Lord does not give you any issues. You gain everything, and it's not even that you gain them, but you gain them as a byproduct. Sometimes, again, coming back to chemistry. So sometimes in a chemical reaction, I don't know, you're trying to extract or displace something and try and get a metal out of it. Let's say you're trying to get copper and you end up doing the reaction, getting copper, and then you might get some sort of hydrogen as well. But you don't actually care about the hydrogen, but the hydrogen is there. So it just comes naturally. So similarly, when one carries out the bhakti, then not only do they gain the byproduct of whatever else that just comes along with it, but they also gain paramsthana, the highest goal, the highest destination. So when understanding all of this, we then realize that now at the time of death, we will, although it might take some time for us to actually process and get our consciousness in, it's very easy to say that we will all die, but it takes a little bit of time to fully reflect and think about that. That at some point, this body that I have, it will deteriorate. There is no way I can permanently exist in this body. This body has to come to a closure. The soul, which is beyond this body, will of course carry on. And so because the soul is carrying on beyond this body, it's important then that because we attain whatever we think about in this body, that we focus and remember the Lord. And when we do that, we will be able to go past this material world, which is an absolute nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. And then not only will we be able to surpass the material world, but we will be able to serve the Lord in pure, loving, devotional service and gain happiness which is undescribable. And not only that, anything else which anyone else can gain through whatever path they carry out, we will also be able to attain that simply as a byproduct without even trying or endeavoring difficultly for it. And so, in that way, we should recognize that we have to remember the Lord at the end of our lives. We have to remember the Lord. The path which the Lord has provided, of course, is Bhakti Yoga. He says among all yogis, if you're looking in yogic processes, among all yogis, yogi namapi sarvesham madgate nandaratmana shraddhavan bhajate yomam same yukta tamomata. The one who's always thinking and remembering the Lord is the greatest there. Now here he's saying whatever path we carry out, again, from the perspective of looking at that time that we're going to pass away, even from that point of view, that this devotional service to the Lord is the supreme. And so we should try to engage in devotional service during our lifetime so that by the end, our consciousness is able to naturally focus on the Lord. Naturally. And so, although it might be very difficult, as especially death is a concept, yes, it is very difficult to go through if one loses their loved ones. It's important to realize then that sometimes people also might think, because it's related to this chapter I'm also mentioning, that, oh no, but my relative did not take up any of the devotions, so does that mean they will undergo suffering, etc., etc. It's also an important point to mention that when we carry out the devotional service, for a pure devotee, I'm not sure for every devotee, but I know for a devotee, is it 7 generations above and 7 generations below?
10 above 10.
Or 10, okay, sorry, 10 above and 10 below.
21.
All of these generations, and of course the generation that we're in, so 10 above, 10 below, 20 plus 1, 21, quick maths. All these generations, above and below, they will all become liberated. So not only does this devotional service help us, but it helps those around us as well. And so we can engage in the devotional service. Now, what's the easiest way to engage in devotional service?
Eating prasadam.
Eating prasadam. Chanting the holy name of the Lord. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And with that, we will conclude the 8th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, which is entitled Attaining the Supreme. And the next session, which is on the 7th of February, the first Sunday, of course, of the month, we will able to delve into the beautiful 9th chapter, the most confidential knowledge. So if there are any questions, please do put them in chat. Hare Krishna, Jai Jagannath, Jai Baladev, that's a wonderful username. And Hare Krishna Subhash Prabhu as well. Hare Krishna Shashi Mataji. There is a little bit of a time delay generally. Hare Krishna Shikha Mataji. If there's a little bit of a time delay, so if any questions are coming, I will just wait an extra minute before we conclude the session. I'm not seeing anything yet. Hare Krishna Shiva Prabhu, Hare Krishna Subhash Prabhu. Okay.
See you.
So we'll see you on the 7th of February with chapter 9, and prasadam will be served at your own homes. Hare Krishna, Hari Bol.
You only have to see.